This is a Forbidden Archives recording. Forbidden Archives is a project dedicated to the preservation of obscure and taboo political literature as a part of the dissident right's anti-university. We are explicitly anti-progressive and open heretics against the cathedral. Join the fight to save the West, and support us at the links below. Feel free to share our videos far and wide.
The Red Decade, The Stalinist Penetration of America, by Eugene Lyons, author of Assignment in Utopia. The menace and the irony of communism are laid bare in this thoroughly informed and startlingly informative book. As a history of Bolshevism in America, and a warning that we cannot afford to ignore, it introduces us to the American leaders and their Muscovite bosses, builds up a terrifying picture of the activities of party members and fellow travelers, and the widespread connivance of innocent dupes. Hordes of everyday Americans and naive liberals have swallowed the bait, but many others have felt the urgent need for a sound expose of the menacing situation. Eugene Lyons is uniquely qualified to tell the fantastic story. As editor of the American Mercury, and in extensive writing, he has in recent years been exposing various phases of the skullduggery in our midst that stems direct from Moscow. He has been able to do so with intimate understanding, because he was close to the business in the early years of the communist intrusion in America, then spent 6 years in Russia itself, as United Press foreign correspondent. That Soviet sojourn, and his profound disillusionment, have been set down in his bestseller Assignment in Utopia. Not hesitating to name names of individuals or groups, this new book portrays the whole crazy opera bouffe of the attempted revolution. The remarkably mediocre leaders, the concentric rings of stooges, the succession of wildly veering policies, authors and journalists led by the nose, and leading others in the jigstep, the hundreds of false fronts and transmission belts, peace, youth, and art groups, the comradely racketeering in WPA and Relief, in labor unions, schools and universities, the Gilbert and Sullivan burlesquerie of pink penthouse teas, the taking in of church workers and Hollywood stars, the sympathy and countenance of high-minded government chiefs and the invasion of government offices. Over and over again, it is shown how the communists pull the wool over the eyes of people all too willing to believe in the social goodness of some organization with a noble name and idealistic pretenses. Here is the sorry parade of men and women of goodwill, welcoming to some fine movement the support of all, including a harmless minority of communists, whereupon the gentle communists quickly take possession of the paid offices and propagandize at Stalin's direction. The fascinating story ranges from farce to melodrama, but what makes the detailed revelation so dismaying is that thousands of well-meaning citizens lent themselves ignorantly and innocently to the sinister game of a foreign tyrant aiming to destroy our democratic way of life. These Americans were hoaxed. Thousands are still being hoaxed. The sensational Hitler-Stalin pact marked the end of a period of amazing communist success infiltrating into every phase of American life. And it marked the start of a new, even more menacing period. Was the hand of Stalin pulling the wires for this or that strike in key defense industries? How was the extraordinary communist fifth column being used as a tool of Nazi policy in America, until Hitler double-crossed his Moscow partner? Mr. Lyons' colorful account of the flip-flops in policy, the celebrities who fall for Muscovite methods of snaring innocents, the humor and the tragedy of the Red Decade, makes breathless reading. It is the first and only complete account of one of the strangest, most amusing, and most appalling chapters in recent American history, and the chapter is not yet ended. Introduction. In defense of red baiting. On the day when this book was ready for the press, Nazi Germany invaded Russia. The attack, as Vice Premier Vyacheslav Molotov charged, was wholly unprovoked. Stalin had appeased Hitler and supported Hitler's cause with unflagging and demonstrative energy. For 22 months, the Communist International and its endless open and clandestine extensions had preached defeatism to the French, immediate negotiated peace to the British, anti-Yankee sentiments to the Latin Americans, rigid isolationism to the people of the United States. The communist line for America had been indistinguishable from the Nazi line: non-intervention in European affairs, promotion of strikes in defense industries, class and group hatreds, and the rest. That line was hastily and clumsily reversed within a few hours after the blitzkrieg was unloosed against Stalin's country. Yesterday's imperialist and plutocratic war was magically transmuted into a people's war for freedom and justice. Conscription, national armaments, aid to Britain were mysteriously sanctified in a flash for all American Stalinists, whether acknowledged or disguised. Through an act of Hitler's, the despised Pluto-democracies were instantly converted into crusaders against evil in the eyes of all good comrades. Two notoriously Stalinoid organizations, the American Youth Congress and the National Maritime Union, happened to be holding conventions soon after the Nazi ingrates double-crossed their Soviet associates. Both had been conspicuously active in fighting any sort of aid to Britain. Now, both came out for unstinted and undelayed American help to the British. The National Organization, especially, created to promote the strictest isolationism and non-intervention, the American Peace Mobilization, called off its peace vigil at the White House and announced its support of the aid to Britain. The whole Communist Peace Front, until the night of June 22nd so loud and busy and crowded, was soon silent and deserted, except for the faint wailing of honest pacifists trampled in the ignominious retreat of the comrades from fake isolationism. By the time this volume is in print, it is certainly not impossible that this somersault of late June may have turned into a double somersault. I can give no assurances that the democratic crusade against Hitlerite aggression will not have turned once more into an imperialist crime. The only way to keep up with the permutations of communist policy is on a loose-leaf basis. The crux of the matter, however, is not in the character of communist propaganda at any given moment, but in the fact that such propaganda, always and unswervingly, is determined by the Kremlin's needs and the Kremlin's instructions. It has not the slightest relation to American affairs. Whether the line, in its zigzag course paralleling Stalin's whims or desperations, coincides with America's national interests or contradicts them, is sheer accident. Stalin's fifth column in America, as in all other nations, has only one set of principles: blind obedience to the will of Moscow. It has only one ideal: allegiance to a foreign dictator. The reversal of June 22nd came as a dramatic demonstration of the truth of the main thesis of this volume. An allegedly American political movement had made two major turns in its policies in less than 2 years, both based exclusively on the altered position of a foreign nation. Each of those turns took a full 180 degrees, completing a circle which encloses the most sinister case of political cynicism and subservience to a foreign overlord in American history. The circumstance that Soviet interests for any period happen to run close to American interests must not obscure the underlying danger represented by the presence of a swarming, disciplined, obedient, and fanatically self-righteous army of Muscovite agents in our midst. It is a gun pointed at the heart and mind of America, not to be complacently mistaken for a toy pistol merely because it's not, at a given moment, being fired. A great many books and a multitude of articles have been published in recent years exposing the native and foreign purveyors of fascism and Nazism in America. But we have yet to hear their authors denounced as brown baiters, black baiters, or silver baiters. The charges are assayed on the basis of their truth or falsity. They are not arbitrarily dismissed with a hackneyed epithet. There is as yet among us, it happens, no taboo against examining and, if necessary, condemning the operation of Mussolini, Hitler, and their direct or indirect agents. Books and articles attacking native and foreign purveyors of Stalin's special brand of totalitarianism, however, are condemned automatically by a portion of the American public as red-baiting. Their authors are branded without further ado as red-baiters. Their charges and their reasoning are not measured by the ordinary yardsticks of veracity or good sense, but swept aside angrily without measuring. The American public, especially in its left and so-called liberal reaches, is the victim of an irrational and indefensible taboo against criticizing the great experiment in Stalin's Russia, or its extensions and machinations in our own country. There is no use reasoning or arguing against this fact. We can merely note the phobia in a scientific spirit and observe its fantastic effects. And we can merely warn the great masses of Americans, which has escaped the phobia, that the taboo is no innocent and accidental gadget. It is a neatly contrived device for heading off free and uninhibited discussions of such little things as man-made famines, horrifying blood purges, forced labor on a gigantic scale, if they happen to occur in Russia. It is no less useful in preventing or discrediting in advance all exposures of Stalinist activities directed against the institutions or even against the life of non-Soviet nations. The self-righteous outcries about red baiting, with which this book, for instance, will be greeted in certain predictable quarters, will have little or nothing to do with the specific contents of this volume. They'll be simply a conditioned reflex on the part of those in the grip of the taboo. And they include, unluckily, a good many literary critics, book reviewers, and political commentators. These people cannot be blamed. They shriek "Red Baiter" at the first contact with sharp criticism of communists as automatically as they cry "ouch" at the first contact with a hot stove. There are some exceedingly curious ingredients in the taboo. The most curious of all is that it's primarily, often exclusively, attack on a particular brand of red ideology or practice which causes a blackout of logic in the victim, namely the brand approved by Moscow at any given moment. Attacks on anarchism, syndicalism, single tax, social credit, or any other non-Stalinist radical movement leave these folk cold and collected. Only criticism aimed directly at communism and its preachers touches off their specialized indignations. Nay, not even communism as such. One may expose Trotsky's variety, or De Lyons, or Jacques Dorio's version of communism without being ostracized from decent, liberal, and intellectual society. It is specifically attack against Stalin's blessed and subsidized communism, and particularly the demonstration that it isn't communism at all, but an approximation of the fascist ideologies, which throws the affected liberals into a panic of violent, know-nothing resistance. Because the Communist Party and its great array of subsidiaries had been the resources and the prestige of a big nation behind them, they have succeeded in imposing that prohibition on American liberals and even a good many conservatives. They have succeeded so well, in fact, that thousands who do not hesitate to speak their minds vigorously about other social philosophies or political regimes stop short, panic-stricken, when it comes to speaking their mind on communism and its ways. It takes money and power and psychological leverage to condition great numbers of people in this fashion. Among the radicals, only Stalin's subjects and employees have possessed these things in ample measure. When the New York PM, a few days after General Walter Krivitsky's death, attacked the dead man in vulgar and vicious style, did it occur to anyone to charge it with red baiting? Did the liberal magazines raise the red baiting clamor when liberals and radicals were pounced upon in an open letter in August 1939? Of course not. But let the same daily insult a live or dead stooge of Stalin. Let some open letter smear Browder or Marcantonio or the communist leader of an outlaw strike, and instantly the fumes of red-baiting charges will fill the air and cloud the issue. When the government took sadly belated steps looking toward the deportation of one Harry Bridges, an Australian communist, the cry of red-baiting echoed through the pseudo-liberal press. No such outcry met the deportation proceedings against Jan Valton, anti-communist radical. Indeed, the aforementioned PM ran an editorial protesting the Bridges affair in the same week when it virtually demanded the deportation of Valton. Incidentally, there's a portion of the press in America which is devoted to almost exclusively vilifying Reds. Its pages run over with bilious invective against social democrats, anarchists, syndicalists, communists of other than Muscovite persuasion, and, in open season, also against the liberals. I refer, of course, to the Stalinist press here. Every issue of the Daily Worker, for instance, is hectic with insults in words and cartoons directed against those Reds whom Moscow disapproves. It occurs to no one, notwithstanding, to call the Daily Worker a red-baiting rag. Yet the Social Democratic New Leader, or Norman Thomas's Socialist Call, when they unmask Stalinist agents, are instantly accused of red-baiting. The communist achievement in obtaining a monopoly on protection under the taboo has been one of the Kremlin's most effective forces in undermining American life and thought. The dread of being labeled a red baiter has kept droves of disillusioned communists and their fellow travelers from announcing and explaining their change of heart and mind. The epithet has been a mark of Cain to outlaw critics of the Russian terror or the Stalinist infiltration of American life. Whenever the communists are under fire, it is served to divert attention from the subject matter to futile discussion of personal motives, the critic's private life, and other deliberate tricks of befuddlement. When someone belabors the Nazis, or the Silver Shirts, the Townsenites, or the Technocrats, it's not assumed or implied that he's been bought by some nation, or bank, or publisher, even though that may be the case. Let the same person attack Russia, or its creatures abroad, and instantly it's assumed by the muddled and inhibited among the liberals that he has sold out to somebody or other. In the old days, Hitler, Mussolini, and the Mikado were regarded as natural purchasers. After the Kremlin had made friends with these three, the market was presumably cornered by Hearst, which may explain why he was selling his art treasures. He couldn't have everything. After the Nazi invasion of Russia, Hearst presumably again faced competition in the market. Certain of my colleagues, having lived in Nazi Germany and learned to recognize Hitler's methods, have written books exposing the Nazi regime and its intrigues on the American soil. As far as I'm aware, they haven't been reprimanded for not saving the southern sharecroppers instead. No book reviewer or liberal commentator has sneered at them. Why must you carry on about concentration camps and political murder in Germany? What about Sacco and Vanzetti and Negro lynchings? It's assumed, sensibly, that they happen to know more about Germany. But this gracious leeway is denied to writers hostile to Stalinist Russia and its foreign conspiratorial empire. When they mention millions of corpses in a Ukrainian famine, they're told off neatly with a scathing reference to the Okies in California. Should they allude to the Soviet purges, they're hit over the head with Mooney and Billings. Until the Nazi-Soviet pact made the procedure a bit awkward, their indictment of terror in Soviet Russia was instantly cancelled out by reference to Nazi terror in Germany. That, obviously, is just another aspect of the same taboo against testing the rosy illusions about communism a la Stalin. It constrains me to give public notice herewith, as I did an assignment in Utopia, that the horrors of Bolshevism do not, in my view, justify horrors elsewhere, including those apparent under capitalism. That the Soviet invasion of American life does not for a moment justify the Nazi invasion or the totalitarian abominations preached by our native fascists and social nihilists. This book, believe it or not, devotes itself exclusively to the story of the Stalinist attack on our institutions and on our mental integrity for the simple reason that it's a book on that subject. The so-called liberals are actually paralyzed by the hobgoblin of red baiting. If ever they're tempted to question Stalin's paradise, they no doubt have nightmares in which they see themselves surrounded by animate megaphones all hooting, "Red baiter! Red herring!" The story is told that Austrian Nazis, before the Anschluss, had a standard device for keeping the police at bay when engaged in beating up adversaries. As soon as the police approached, the Nazis began to sing the national anthem. Automatically, the policemen snapped to attention and stood rooted to the spot, long enough for the ringleaders to escape. In the same way, the cry of red baiting halts liberals in their tracks when they're tempted to go after communism. There can be no clear thinking, no clear examination of the issues raised by the Kremlin's intrusion in American life until the red baiter taboo has been exercised. A beginning, at least, can be made if those who exposed communist skullduggery walk up boldly to the terrible hobgoblin and, taking their courage in their hands, say "boo" right in its face. After that, I can assure them, they'll be able to wear their red baiter tag with a flourish of pride, and their sleep will be as sweet as a healthy infant's. Here, by way of beginning, I propose to say boo if an attempt to tell the truth about Russia at home and Russia abroad is red baiting. Then I proclaim myself a red baiter. I trust that this book, indeed, may merit top ranking as a better than average exemplar of honest and effective red baiting as thus defined. What's more, I challenge all intellectually honest liberals to break through their inhibitions by saying boo. They will not find it easy at first, of course, and may have to practice it before their mirrors with their doors closed and blinds drawn. But after a while, they'll discover that neither thunder nor lightning will descend on their heads, but only a matter of harmless sparks unloosed from 13th Street off Union Square in New York. In the end, they'll be cured, and will be able to examine the mythology of Stalinism as calmly as the folklore of capitalism or the mythology of Hitlerism. I invite them, in fact, to test their psychological courage on the pages which follow. If they can read them through without one apoplectic fit or one frenzied yelp of "red baiter," they may consider themselves emancipated at long last. This book does not pretend to be an academic and comprehensive history of communism in America. That remains to be done by someone of more scholarly temper. It is frankly journalistic and polemic, a needed exposure in a moment of national and worldwide crisis. It is intended to be an informal account of Bolshevism in our country, the strange Bolshevism that preached a bizarre climax in an amazingly successful People's or Popular Front phase of Muscovite activity outside its Russian homeland. In the decade before Stalin and Hitler made the infamous bargain that touched off the Second World War, our Red Decade, the United States lived through a grotesque and incredible revolution. The fact that it was neither communist nor revolutionary, in the normal sense of these words, is not an incidental paradox. It is a clue to the essential nature of the event, its Machiavellianism. The distinguishing mark of the Red Decade was hypocrisy, manifest in false front societies, secret inner caucus controls, duplicate and triplicate names, high-minded lying, and deceptions. Its methods are implicit in key words and phrases which contributed to our political vocabulary. Words like fellow traveler, party line, innocence club, transmission belts, front organizations, social fascists. We are not dealing with candid revolutionists who have the courage of their convictions, men and women whose moral stature we can respect. We are dealing, for the most part, with people who could not even understand the inspired frenzy of honest rebels from Spartacus down to Tom Paine and John Brown, Eugene V. Debs, and Emma Goldman. During the Red Decade, we were confronted, in the main, with a horde of part-time pseudo-rebels who have neither courage nor convictions, but only a muddy emotionalism and a mental fog which made them an easy prey for the arbiters of a political racket. At the core of the incredible revolution was a small group of leaders, some known to the public, others obscure but no less powerful, still others, the official resident agents of the Moscow hierarchy, secret but most powerful of all. Around them was the solid ring of Communist Party members, the mass of them acknowledging their allegiance, but an effective minority concealing their membership under fake names and even protesting with outraged vehemence when accused of being members. Beyond them were deployed the more diffuse and vastly more numerous fellow travelers, consciously working within the movement, though obeying a moral rather than organizational discipline. And farther out were concentric ring after ring of wholly or partly innocent camp trailers. Clearly we can have more human esteem for the open party members, accepting the yoke and facing the music, than for the fellow travelers and sympathizers who played the game without risking any of their own chips. All of it was more of a conspiracy than a political movement, more a hoax than a social upsurge. The innocence of so many victims and their eagerness to be taken in does not detract from the chicanery, but makes it more mischievous. And because the whole thing was conspiratorial and vague at its edges, any attempt to measure its magnitude or effect statistically must fail. The burlesque revolution whispered or shouted, as occasion required, now disclaiming any influence, now boasting of direct control of the minds of millions. The same officials who wailed about red-banding exaggerations when credited with fomenting certain events or dominating certain organizations insisted on such credit in reports to the higher-ups in Moscow. Our own American Popular Front, though never officially in power, as it was in France and for a brief period in Spain, penetrated, in various degrees, the labor movement, education, the churches, college and non-college youth movements, the theater, movies, the arts, publishing in all its branches. It bored deep into the federal government, and in many communities also into local government. It obtained a stranglehold on great sectors of national and local relief setups and made-work projects through dominion of the Workers' Alliance, capture of key jobs, and other stratagems. At its highest point, roughly about 1938, the incredible revolution of the Red Decade had mobilized the conscious or the starry-eyed, innocent collaboration of thousands of influential American educators, social workers, clergymen, New Deal officials, youth leaders, Negro and other racial spokesmen, social registrites, novelists, Hollywood stars, scriptwriters and directors, trade union chiefs, men and women of abnormal wealth. Its echoes could be heard, muted or strident, in the most unexpected places, including the supposed citadels of conservatism and respectability. It's easy, of course, to exaggerate the strength of this phenomenon, but it's even easier to brush the whole thing aside as a negligible and rather amusing aberration. The fact is that the complex Communist United Front tinctured every department of American life while it lasted, and has left its color indelibly on the mind and moral attitudes of the country. Our labor movement, politics, art, culture, and vocabulary still carry its imprint. Even those who are not repentant and shamefaced in the present sour aftermath still carry the scars of the planned hypocrisy on their minds and souls. Something devious clings to their thinking on the affected subjects. In organized labor, where it operates chiefly as the left wing of the CIO, and at this writing still enjoys the patronage of John L. Lewis, it is even more deeply entrenched than it was before the Moscow-Berlin partnership was announced, and, until the German invasion of Russia, was consciously sabotaging the national defense effort under trade union banners. A generation of college youth has been poisoned by communist amoralism and has carried the disease into manifold post-collegiate activities. In exposing the past and current machinations of the Kremlin junta and its multitudes of innocents and stooges, I am decidedly not beating a dead horse. The animal is very much alive and gets its oats regularly from the Central International fodder stocks. Because the stakes are particularly important at this time, the Kremlin unquestionably is investing more cash and effort than ever before in the game. American Bolshevism, now, in 1941, in its 21st year, has reached its majority. It has learned a lot from its successive experiences and political incarnations, period after period, and by this time feels as much at home in the open or underground, among maritime workers or bishops, as the pampered favorite of government officials, or as their special target of attack. There is no corner of American life where it does not have its outright agents or complacent and dependable sympathizers, and behind it, to guide and chide, to urge and purge, is the Communist International, the greatest worldwide agitational, propaganda, espionage, and sabotage organization ever built in the whole history of human society. The arts of propaganda, as practiced by the Comintern, are effectively supplemented by direct action, ranging from slander to murder. That organization is in our midst, for the most part as a secret underground movement in its immediate phase, but functioning above ground in a new array of innocence clubs and a new set of transmission belts. In the measure that it operates through camouflaged stooge organizations under disarming names behind respectable show window committees, it is even more reprehensible and more dangerous. Stalinism in America today represents the most serious single sabotage potential. It is widely diffused, effectively disguised, firmly entrenched in government and other influential spheres. Beguilingly packaged in pseudo-idealistic wrappings, it finds takers among well-meaning Americans who would never succumb to the unsubtle Hitlerite salesmanship. I'm aware that much of this indictment, even after I have set it down in considerable detail, will sound far-fetched to the uninitiated. But the reader should recall that the story of social disintegration and totalitarian skullduggery in important sectors of life in France would have sounded far-fetched to anyone who told it before the collapse of that country made those things only too obvious and too credible. The complacency of the average American has operated to facilitate the work of the communists as of other foreign agents. The success or failure of the current Muscovite line for America, a line revised constantly by absentee masters, will depend on the temper of America, or on its moral stamina. It will depend also on its comprehension of the Kremlin's techniques. This volume, I hope, may contribute a little to that comprehension. I wish to acknowledge gratefully the invaluable help of S.L. Salome, who did the spade work for this volume in gathering and organizing basic data and documents. I wish to express many thanks also to those who have generously helped with suggestions, corrections, and information. Especially to Victor Riesel, Benjamin Stolberg, Ben Mandel, Hugo Pollock, Nelson Frank, Sam Barron, William G. Ryan, and Suzanne LaFollette. In the writing of the initial historical chapters, I found Benjamin Gitlow's fine autobiography, I Confess, particularly valuable as a source book, and herewith acknowledge my indebtedness to it. Many of those whose names appear in the following pages in connection with the activities of the Communist Party and its subsidiaries have since broken with Stalinism. Some of them indeed have become fervent opponents of the Stalinist penetration. Since this is a history, told as far as convenient chronologically, it has not been possible or always desirable to expunge names from the historical record. I can only proffer apologies in advance for any incidental embarrassment the record may cause to such people. Fortunately, most of them have the intellectual integrity not to conceal their Stalinist past. With few exceptions, as I have tried to underline in these pages, they were victims of their own idealistic urges and of a conjuncture of social pressures. The Depression, the moral disintegration of the intelligentsia and the middle classes as the economic debacle developed, these were more potent in shaping the Red Decade than any of the masterminds on New York's Union Square. Those who were sucked into the vortex of that bizarre revolution were not always to blame. I had tried to understand the social phenomenon rather than to lambaste its dupes, and it is possible that I have not always succeeded in this feat of fairness.